Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 28 of the regular season for the San Jose Sharks as they took on the Washington Capitals and won by a score of 2-1 in overtime. This was the Sharks' second game of a 6-game road trip, but more importantly, it was the first game of a 4-game gauntlet that they will be running over this next week as they face off against some of the best teams that the Eastern Conference has to offer, including the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers, the always dominant, at least in the regular season, Carolina Hurricanes, a team that you can never quite count out, the Tampa Bay Lightning, and their matchup here tonight, the current best team in the Eastern Conference, and the most prolific offensive team in the entire league, the Washington Capitals. And even though the Sharks did get that extra day off yesterday, this is still a game in which they have to travel across the country, an entirely different time zone. This was not going to be an easy matchup for San Jose just because of the circumstances surrounding it. When you add on the fact that they were going up against a team that has just been piling up the goals as of late this season, this was a game in which the deck was definitely stacked against, and I really would not have been surprised if the Sharks had ended up coming out on the losing side of things. But not only do they manage to avoid that and actually go toe-to-toe with this Washington Capitals team, but they actually controlled large portions of this game. Starting off in the first period, the Sharks actually had the first few good shifts here tonight, but they end up getting called for an unfortunate and kind of weak penalty call on Carl Grundstrom, who goes to the box for cross-checking, and that was actually the wake-up call for the Washington Capitals as they begin to pile on chance after chance. And honestly, the Sharks were pretty lucky to have escaped this first period, having not given up a single goal, in large part to some great goaltending from Mackenzie Blackwood, but also just some pretty bad puck luck for Washington, who had pucks jump over their sticks or hit the side of the net instead of going in. The Sharks could have potentially found themselves in a deficit by the end of this first period, but instead with a 1-0 lead thanks to a late first period goal from Tyler Toffoli, his 10th of the season. But if the Sharks continued to play in such a manner for the rest of this game, they almost certainly would have lost. So instead, to open up the second period, while the Sharks still weren't looking great, they slowed down the Washington Capitals, and the first few minutes of the second period were kind of feeling each other out in a way. Really, where the momentum started to shift in favor of the San Jose Sharks is when they came on at the halfway mark of the second period with a great offensive zone shift that kept the Capitals hemmed into their own zone for a good 2 to 3 minutes. And while San Jose didn't score or even generate all that great of a chance from this, it did give them the energy to really be able to carry that momentum into most of the rest of this second period. The reason I say most is because the Capitals would actually end up scoring their game-tying goal here from Dowd, just some really, really poor defensive zone coverage off of a face-off for the Sharks that allows Dowd to just be all alone in front, and that makes it 1-1. But the Sharks, definitely the better team in the latter half of that second period, probably could have had a goal or two themselves. In the third period, however, Washington being that home team, being the much better team on paper, they could have come in here, really asserted themselves in this game, picked up a couple of goals, and ended this one off easily like that. But the Sharks, immense credit needs to go towards them. Not only do they prevent that from happening, but they themselves were the better team in these last 20 minutes. They were the ones getting the majority of the chances. They were the ones who had those good looks that makes Washington feel as though they were lucky to have even picked up a single point from this game, because the Sharks came oh so close to scoring and getting that go-ahead goal multiple times thanks to their first line, and really all of these three lines, these top 9 lines, were rolling in this final period for the Sharks. So they end up going into the overtime, but they have a major advantage picked up for themselves because of a 4-minute penalty, a double minor for high sticking that Tom Wilson ends up picking up after he high sticks Celebrini right in the face. He goes down, he's bleeding, so that secures the double minor. And while they are unable to take advantage on the 5-on-4 situation during regulation, they do manage to take advantage of the 4-on-3 situation in the overtime. Eklund one-timer set up by Granlund and Celebrini with a great screen in front by Wenberg, so all 4 players involved, and that gets them the victory. And we see in the Sharks, they've been pretty good as of late. A couple wins against Seattle, a game against Ottawa they probably should have been able to get the victory in, but this was always going to be the very real challenge. These next 4 games, really, where are the San Jose Sharks? How good of a team is this actually? Are they going to still remain in the basement of this season, or could they actually move up a little bit? And with this victory against Washington, it does give hope that maybe this team is a good bit better than we originally thought. Moving on to the players to talk about, we have the Sharks top line of Eklund, Celebrini, and Zetterlund remaining together here. Not really any lineup changes, at least not to the Sharks top 9, so they remain the exact same as they has been as of late. It was a pretty inconsistent game, I would say, for the Sharks top line. We start off with Macklin Celebrini, who I believe had a slow start to this one. I was not super impressed with what he was doing in this first period. Obviously, the bar is exceptionally high for Celebrini, just 16 games into his career. He has already shown so much that you kind of expect a lot from him coming in onto a game-by-game basis. So even his mediocre play is better than most of the other Sharks players, but still, I thought he was not really managing to pull off a lot of the plays he was going for in those first 20 minutes. But the type of player that Celebrini is, when it comes to these elite talents, these special types of players in the NHL, even if they're not having the best of the best games, you can never actually count them out. If you take your eye off of them for even a second, they're going to burn you. And we saw that happen in the second and third period. Macklin Celebrini comes in with some great assists. He had a fantastic setup, I think, for Zetterlund right in front, who came so close to scoring, if not for a fantastic save from Logan Thompson. He had some great chances just shooting-wise himself. He probably could have picked up a goal. He probably could have picked up a regulation assist. His point streak does notably continue with that secondary assist on the Eklund goal, now up to 15 points in 16 games, so that's quite nice to see. But the fact is that even if he might not be playing at his best at all times here tonight, he is the type of player that he's going to show up anyhow and still make a huge impact on the game. And so he was still one of the Sharks' better players here tonight. But what I really want to talk about when it comes to Macklin Celebrini is not necessarily the fantastic offensive play, the speed, the defensive play or anything like that. It's actually the toughness that he is able to bring on the ice. It was a few games ago, I believe against the Ottawa Senators, where he ends up taking a puck to the face in the last few minutes of the third period. And for most players, they'll go down, that'll be an injury, they'll head to the bench and they'll have to shake it off for a few minutes. For Celebrini, he doesn't skip a beat. He knows the Sharks are trailing by a goal in this game. He knows they need to be able to make that comeback and that he needs to be a big part of that. And so he stays on the ice. There doesn't even seem to be a small flinch in him, or at least anything besides a small flinch. That is showing immense toughness. And the case here tonight, once again, he takes this high stick, he goes down, he's bleeding, that he could have easily headed to the dressing room, gotten the stitches or whatever the case may be, waited out, maybe not play the rest of this game, but he remains on the bench, and once that bleeding is under control in just a minute and he's got the gauze in his nose, he's right back out there ready to make a play, and a play he does make in the overtime. So this type of physical maturity is not to be really expected from an 18-year-old. Usually 18-year-olds are a little bit more fragile because going up against grown men, 25, 30-plus-year-old players who have been in the league for so long, there's a tendency where you're not necessarily going to be able to show that same level of toughness as those other players will. But somehow, some way, he's just that special of a player that he feels as though he has been a veteran of the league for so many years, even if this is just his 16th game of his career. That's just really the difference maker between Celebrini and most other prospects that we have rarely ever seen with the San Jose Sharks. When it comes to the two other players on this line, we do have Fabian Zetterlund. There was an interesting quote from the broadcast from Zetterlund where they asked him, because he's still wearing the fishbowl from the injury he had a couple of games ago, and they asked him how that's affecting his game, and he says it's not much, but when he has the puck in his skates, it can be a bit difficult to keep his visibility on it, and you honestly kind of saw that a bit here tonight. It felt as though Zetterlund was mishandling pucks at times here, especially in the early parts of this game. He got a little bit better as it went on, mostly because both Celebrini and Eklund got better as it went on. So it wasn't a bad game for Zetterlund, but you are hoping still, as I've said in each of these last couple of games really, that for a little bit more from him to really complete the circuit on this top line, because they are very, very close to being like a really, really great first line. It just feels as though there's something a little bit missing, and Zetterlund is definitely a part of that. When it comes to the other winger on this top line, we do have William Eklund. He also kind of had that up and down game of inconsistencies shown throughout the night. He had some great looks for sure. He had that great pass to, I think, Zetterlund in the third period. No look behind the back that you don't really expect, but still, it was a really, really good one. He had, of course, the game winner here, which was nice to see him get rewarded. So it was not a bad game from William Eklund, but inconsistent for sure. What I'm really excited about for Eklund is that it is expected that when tomorrow the NHL decides to announce their 4 nations rosters for Canada, USA, Finland, and Sweden, that Eklund will be on Team Sweden. So he has been getting some good recognition amongst San Jose Sharks fans this season, having taken a big step forward compared to last year. But that will be an opportunity, a tournament for him to really get some recognition around the league if he's able to put up a good performance. So it'll be very interesting to see what he's able to do in that tournament. And when it comes to this game, again, it was pretty good at the very least. When it comes to the Sharks' second line, I have been somewhat hard on this second line in each of these last couple of games. While the Sharks have been winning, I have said that they need to show a little bit more, and I think they actually did that here tonight. It still wasn't amazing, but I do think they were all right. In fact, this was the line that did get that very important shift in the middle part of the second period that moved momentum in favor of the San Jose Sharks. When it comes to Luke Kunin, he was a player, I talked about throughout much of last year as having been really, really bad. There was really not a lot of favorable and positive things to be said about Luke Kunin throughout the entirety of last season. So much so that I didn't even want to see him get a contract with the Sharks again this year. But Greer, he gives him one last chance, a 1-year deal, a prove-it type of deal for himself, and prove it he has. He has been an effective player, even if he is a bottom 6 player in the Sharks' top 6. The Sharks have tried other bottom 6 players in this type of position. Barclay Goodrow, Ty Dellandrea, neither have looked even remotely serviceable in those roles, but Kunin actually has. I'm waiting every single game. I'm waiting for the moment in which Kunin does fall off and I can say, oh, okay, time to remove Kunin from this second line, but it hasn't yet happened because he looks engaged, he looks speedy, he looks physical, he's creating room on the ice for both Toffoli and Wenberg. His defensive play has been all right in a role in which I have thought that he would kind of get abused by other teams' top players, and it has happened occasionally, but not as consistently as I thought it would. And so Kunin has been looking quite good, and credit needs to go towards him for that. When it comes to the other winger on this line, Tyler Toffoli, I was not impressed with him in the previous game against Seattle. I thought he would have to step up a bit, and I thought he did that. Still wasn't a great game for Tyler Toffoli, but he was a good bit better for sure, and like I mentioned, his 10th goal of the season, nice to see. And when it comes to the centerman on this line, it is Alex Wenberg. Some issues defensively. I talked about how they had that really good shift that moved momentum in favor, but they also were the line that was on the ice for the Dowd goal, and they obviously got a very mixed up in that defensive positioning there. So you have to take a little bit of points away from this second line for that, but I still thought it was all right for them, a step up from where they were previously, and Wenberg, being that kind of tie-together player, was a part of it for sure. When it comes to the Sharks' third line, we continue to have Granlund, Costin, and Smith, and they continue to be very effective for the San Jose Sharks. We start off with Will Smith, who I thought there was a lot of good from Smith here tonight. Obviously there's the offensive plays. He put himself in some great scoring positions here tonight. It was a weird situation where it wasn't the scoring positions in which the goaltender was robbing him time and time again. It's not as though Smith is going to have nightmares of Logan Thompson here tonight because he should have been able to score a hat trick, but Thompson was just always there. Smith had the scoring positions, but then he was kind of fanning on these shots. So you're looking for him to be a bit more consistent in those particular areas, a bit stronger on his skates so that he can actually get that shot off and actually get the grade A look. But the fact that he was in these positions, it's something that he was not doing in the earlier parts of the season, so that is definitely a plus. I was also a big fan of what Smith was able to do in the defensive zone, however. I have talked previously about his anticipation, being able to read the play. What is the other team actually going to do so you can put yourself in the position to take advantage of it? And I thought he was actually doing that rather well. He managed to create some high D-zone turnovers against Washington multiple times here tonight. So credit to him for that area. If there's one thing that that he does need to improve, yet again, I've constantly mentioned these small areas of improvement, it's his neutral zone play. It feels as though a few times he's forcing these passes or he's trying to make a play instead of just dumping the puck into the zone if maybe that's the better move. So there are times in which he ends up giving these pucks away in the neutral zone, something to clean up for sure, but still a very good game for Will Smith, one of the Sharks' better players for sure. When it comes to his two line mates, we continue with Klim Kostin, who continues to really have this resurgence this season. He's been so good in each of these last few games. He continues to fill this role marvelously. He's not necessarily the highest hockey IQ player on the entire team. It's not as though he's perfectly setting up these plays, like surgical type of precision, but he's the type of guy who is difficult to separate from the puck. He protects it very well. He has some okay playmaking skills. He's got an okay shot. He's physical. He creates space, and it allows both Will Smith and Mikael Granlund, who are definitely more skilled guys, to actually be able to take advantage. But unlike a Barclay Goodrow who has zero talent, you have Klim Kostin, who does have the ability to make a play on occasion, and we saw that multiple times here tonight, setting players up pretty well. And so I was again impressed with what Kostin was able to do. And when it comes to their centerman on this line, Mikael Granlund, he's been a bit up and down since returning from injury. He's always been good at the very least, and that continues here tonight. But it was like that previous game against Seattle, he was superb, outstanding, perhaps the Sharks' best player. Here tonight, he was again good, but you are maybe hoping for a little bit more from Granlund. Then when it comes to the Sharks' fourth line, they started this game off quite poorly. I was not really a fan of what they were able to do in that first period, but as the game wore on, they definitely got a good bit better. In particular, both Sturm and Delandre, I thought, were really strong in the neutral zone of being able to shut down the Capitals' plays that they were making. The soft line, obviously, as per usual, didn't get a ton of ice time, but when they were on, they were at least solid enough defensively, at least in the second and third periods, to be doing some good things and being positive impact players for San Jose. The slight weak link on this fourth line, I would say, was Carl Grundstrom. I didn't think he had the best of best games, but not the worst either. When it comes to the Sharks' defensive pairings, we have Jake Wallman and Cody Ceci. We start off again with Wallman, who has been really good in each of these last couple of games, and that continues here tonight. And this was a real test for Jake Wallman, because no offense to the Seattle Kraken, who are a good team, but they very well might not end up making the playoffs. They're not exactly the perfect challenge for a player like Jake Wallman, but going up against a Washington Capitals team, as I mentioned, the best team in the Eastern Conference so far this season, and also the highest scoring team in the entire league, this was a real test to see what the Sharks have in Jake Wallman, having put him into this number one defenseman role. Will he crumble under the immense offensive pressure, or will he rise to the occasion? And he definitely rised to the occasion. He was so good here tonight for San Jose. There were a couple of smaller errors, but none of the major ones that have at times plagued his game this season. And what I really appreciated Wallman for was his confidence with the puck, especially in the offensive zone. The fact that the Sharks have put so much responsibility onto him, and the fact that he has responded with the amount of points that he currently has, it has kind of led to this position where Wallman is so very empowered to be able to make these plays, and he's able to make even the best players on the Capitals look silly, like with that move he made onto Dylan Strome at the blue line at some point in this game. I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was definitely a memorable moment as Jake Wallman was just skating circles at times around the blue line in the offensive zone, looking so impressive for San Jose as he continues to truly be one of their best players on the ice. When it comes to his defensive partner, Cody Ceci, not the perfect game for Ceci. There were a couple of times in which he got caught in some pretty bad positions, and he doesn't really have the speed to come back in those certain spots. But I thought when it came to just his general play in the defensive zone, he was actually rather solid. When he was having a couple of struggling moments, he was supported well by his pairing partner, Jake Wallman. So I thought Ceci played a pretty good game. When it comes to the Sharks' second defensive pairing, Ferraro and Liljegren, I was again impressed with what these two were able to do. I've been kind of hit or miss with Liljegren in each of these last couple of games. He's shown some solid offensive talent, but defensively, he was struggling a bit with the speed of the Seattle Kraken. Here tonight, though, I thought he was a good bit better. His defensive game, not really many major holes, and I thought offensively, while maybe not quite at the level of a Jake Wallman, he was really jumping into it, and he was making an impact in those areas. So I was impressed with what Liljegren was able to do. And then when it comes to Mario Ferraro, while he struggled a little bit for sure in that first period, he really picked it up as we came into the second and third, and I was somewhat impressed with what Ferraro was able to do through much of this game. But then we get to the Sharks' third defensive pairing, and there's not as much sunshine and rainbows here. The Sharks' third defensive pairing was just bad for the Sharks tonight. There was not either of these two players where you had really any redeeming qualities, if I have to say. When it comes to Henry Thrun, I continue to get so nervous pretty much every single time Thrun touches the puck in the defensive zone. His offensive zone play is all right. His neutral zone play is decent. But in the defensive zone, even under very little pressure, and you just need to make a very simple pass, something that literally every other defenseman can do under no pressure, it feels as though there are times in which he's just giving pucks away for absolutely no reason. And so he's someone who your heart skips a beat every time he touches the puck in these situations, because it seems to burn the Sharks more often than literally any other player on the team. And then when it comes to Jan Rutta, this was not a good game for him as well. We go to that Dowd goal that the Capitals did score. Rutta is an absolute no man's land here off the faceoff. Maybe you could say, well, someone on the Sharks should have been covering his position, as this was kind of like a set play off the faceoff, but still, it was just a weird move by Rutta to move up as he did in the defensive zone in this spot. So I don't really know what was going through his mind here, but even in the defensive zone on other plays, he was not remotely decent. And so this third line, definitely the sort of down spot for the Sharks, the black mark here for the Sharks for this particular game. And of course, we know that Jack Thompson is waiting on the sidelines. He hasn't gotten into the lineup in each of these last few games. And on top of that, Marc-Edouard Vlasic is traveling, and it seems as though his return is very, very close. And so it is possible, I would say, that one of those two defensemen, if not both, depending, could draw into the lineup at some point over these next few games if this type of bad play does continue from both Thrun and Rutta. And then finally, we have the Sharks goaltender Mackenzie Blackwood. He only lets in a single goal, a really, really strong outing yet again for Blackwood. He was great in the previous one against Seattle. It continues here tonight. He was huge for the San Jose Sharks in those first 20 minutes, and then San Jose did him a few more favors in the last couple of periods, but generally, it was a very, very effective game for Blackwood. But that would do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Thursday. They'll be taking on the Tampa Bay Lightning. That is technically going to be their easiest matchup of these 4 games, as the Lightning at the moment find themselves on the outside looking in of the playoffs. That's mostly because they haven't played that many games this year, at just, I think, 23, at least coming into the day. But they are, as I mentioned earlier on, a team that the Sharks and anyone can really never count out. They've got some great talent still there with Kucherov and Hedman and Vasilevsky, these types of players, not to mention the fact that they are only a few years removed from those back-to-back Stanley Cups, so the Sharks will still have their hands full. Class dismissed.